With this talk, our brothers ask that we read from Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9. And the whole earth was of one language and one speech. It came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, "Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. They said, "Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. The Lord said, "Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language." And this they began to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth. They left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from hence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. I will be pleased to call upon Brother Rich and his talk for the afternoon, the people of the Old Testament.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, young people. So the purpose of this lecture is to give some perspective, is to give some background information, to really understand the world that a lot of the people of the Old Testament who we love, who we gain inspiration from, whose lives really have been the foundation of our walk in the truth, to give perspective on what their lives were like, what the world was like during that time. And so I put this map up here on the board, on the screen, and it may look very awkward. This is obviously not a true representation of the earth as we know it. But to the ancients, to the ancient man, particularly when this map was made during the time of the Romans around 43 AD, this was the known world. This was the world of the Romans. This was the world of ancient man. And so when we look at the times that, say, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived, David, the other kings, Solomon, it's very important to see the world as they saw it, to understand the culture, to understand the religion, to understand the different nations that were involved when we read about these things in the Old Testament. And I think if we have this background information, if we understand the world as it was during this time, we'll get a better understanding of the great faith that these individuals had and some of the pressures that they had to deal with in order to follow after God, in order to be faithful during their time on earth. So we had read for us the 11th chapter of Genesis. And we're going to begin with an area that is mentioned here in the 11th chapter of Genesis in the second verse called Shinar. And if you look here by the Euphrates River, you will see two major cities. One of them is Ur, and Ur is mentioned in that same 11th chapter in the 31st verse. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, and his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees. And so that's the area that we're speaking of. The area of Sumer. And another name for Sumer as used in Scripture is Shinar. And so that was mentioned there in that second verse. And it is from this area that I'd like to start with, to take a look at what the culture was like, what the people were like. Why did God call out Abraham? Because we're told that, aren't we, in the 12th chapter of Genesis, in that first verse. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. So what was this area that Abram was born in? What was the culture like? Why did God want him to leave and go to a different land? So let's take a look at it. If we were to go to modern-day Iraq, where Shinar, ancient Shinar is located, we could go to the ancient city of Ur. And at the ancient city, we could go and see the great ziggurat that is still there. This is an actual picture that was built thousands and thousands of years ago and still remains standing. And that's pretty amazing given all the upheaval that has happened in Iraq. There's actually a picture of United States troops, American troops, walking up the steps up to the top of this when they invaded Iraq in 2003. But this is called a ziggurat. And this was called the Mountain of God. And so on top of this would be a temple or a shrine to the host of many gods that were in Sumer, particularly in the city-states of Ur and the other city-states as well. Each city-state would have its own god. And they would build this mountain of brick, which is mentioned there in the 11th chapter as well, talking about building a tower in Babel. This was most likely what they were building, a massive ziggurat. And this is where all of their religious festivals, their sacrifices would be held, and it's still around today. Here's an artist's rendition, I think, which gives us kind of a view of what the ancient city of Ur would have looked like. It was a grand city. In some cases, these city-states would hold over 50,000 people. They would be walled. At the center of it would be the ziggurat, as is the case here. There would be canals built around it, as you can see as well. And something very interesting, all along the flat plain of this area that we can see from this drawing were miles and miles of wheat and barley. And so they were known for the growing of wheat and their growing of barley. And this is where we first find in human civilization the beginning of farming, the beginning of agriculture, the beginning of job specialization, where everybody now doesn't have to farm. They have a surplus of food because of the plowing techniques that they had. Other people could do other things, like become blacksmiths, become merchants, so on and so forth. And so civilization now is going to slowly grow, and we're going to get cities like this here in this drawing. Very advanced. To make one thing clear, we can look back at ancient man and kind of poo-poo some of the stuff that they did. Oh, they were very backward, they didn't understand things. But at that time, ancient man was modern man. At that time, they were at the pinnacle of human advancement. And so everything that was being done in the cities such as Ur and other places such as Babylon had never been done before. And we need to keep that in mind. They were a trading network as well, with these canals right here. And this picture here shows some of the ships and the boats that would go up and down the canals, go up and down the two main rivers here in Mesopotamia, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And these two rivers are going to play an important part in the growth of the civilization in Shinar, or as it's called, Sumer as well. And they would trade. I have a slide here that we'll get to. But massive networks of trading would go on in the Middle East, as far as India and Afghanistan, and also over to Africa as well. And you can see it's very busy. There would be ports, there would be canals. These cities were built in the midst of these two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And this is kind of an aerial view, which I like, and it just shows the grandness of the city of Ur at the time of Abraham. And you can see the canals, you can see the walled cities and the gates, and the massive structures in the midst of the city there, the complex, which would be the temple complex, but also the palace complex as well, where the nobles and the kings would live and rule. One short comment about this: all of these city-states were polytheistic. They believed in many gods. Okay? And so this idea of one God is going to begin, particularly with God calling out Abram. Now, it would be totally foreign to anybody living in Ur to think of there being only one God. They believed in hundreds of different gods that controlled all of the aspects of nature. And they needed to be appeased. And if they weren't appeased, bad things were going to happen to them. So the idea and the great faith of Abram, hearing God's voice and leaving this area, is truly remarkable. I like this picture right here. It shows kind of the inside of the city of Ur and the houses that they would live in. You can see it's bustling. There's thousands and thousands of people. Notice on the roof, in the summertime, this is where they would spend most of their time, because it was in the city would be much too hot. Particularly in Iraq, where it can get up to over 100 degrees, in some cases 120. They would sleep on the roof. It would be cool there. They'd get a breeze. And then down inside, you'd have the courtyard where people would stay. So interesting picture. This would be Abraham and Sarah's world, as well as Lot. And you know that Lot kind of, and his wife, they were looking for that city life, weren't they? And then eventually that's where they ended up, in the gates of Sodom. Here is a picture of some idols. These were actually figurines of worshipers, figurines of people worshiping. The larger figurines would be kings, and then the smaller one would be the peasants, the smaller people. So there would be all these figurines of individuals praying to their different gods. And these are found, thousands of these have been found by archaeologists in dig sites. I'm going to go through these rather quickly, but here is an example of some of the luxurious things that were taken out of the city of Ur. They actually dug up one of the nobility's tombs, and inside they found this: the headdresses, the gold, the lapis lazuli, the beads, so on and so forth. This is called the Ur Standard. This is very famous, and it has two sides. The side that we're looking at here is all about war. You can see the chariots here. You can see the soldiers with their swords. And, down below you can see the horses kind of trampling over all the dead, and they're taking prisoners. And then on the other side, you have kind of a peaceful life. And you can see at the top, you have the king over to the left-hand side. He's sitting down. He has his servants. People are enjoying themselves. Having glasses of wine or beer at a festival or a party. You can see agriculture is kind of the basis of the whole economy, right? You can see a lot of the different domesticated animals. Here is a harp from that period as well. So they were big into music. And you can see the craftsmanship associated with this harp right here. Pretty intricate. One of the gold helmets taken from this area as well. And so this was a sophisticated civilization that Abraham left. Another kind of, I believe this is an antelope getting up on its hind legs and eating the tender leaves of a plant right here. And you can see, it's made out of gold and other precious things. So very important. You obviously from these things right here can see some of the wealth that the city of Ur and the other city-states in this area had. And this is where, Abram grew up in this. Abraham is going to grow up in this. Here is a board game. I don't know how to play it at all. But you have, looks like, different, number system, different, things you can kind of, a regular board game where you can go, you land on something and something happens. It looks like some dice there as well. So, kind of sounds like today. There's very wealthy. A lot of leisure time for certain people as well. Board games. You don't invent board games if if you don't have some time on your hands. So, now this is the area we're talking about right here, Mesopotamia. It's a Greek word that means between the rivers, and those rivers are the Tigris and the Euphrates. This is commonly referred to as the Fertile Crescent, and you can see that it's the Fertile Crescent. So if you look over to your right, where the Persian Gulf is, there it makes like a crescent, right? A crescent roll or a crescent moon, all the way down into Egypt or down into Canaan, what is going to be known as Israel as well. And there's a lot of familiar names on there, isn't there? You have there, Babylon is there, Syria. The Assyrians are going to be from this area as well, and other individuals. And so Israel is going to be in the midst of this Fertile Crescent. Just an example of, agriculture that goes on today. I kind of like this picture because it shows, people living very similar to the way that the peasant farmers lived during the time of Abraham as well. There are actually a group of people called the Marsh Arabs that live in this area, that live in down in the southern portion of Iraq, that they make all of their houses out of reeds. They put them together and tie them up together. It's fascinating, and that way of life has not changed since the time of Abraham. But here's an example, right? You're living right on the water, right in a canal, and this is how they make their living. Another example is the Tigris River, and you can see, this is where people are going to build their homes. They're going to build villages, they're going to build towns, they're going to build great cities along these two rivers. Very important. And if you know your history, you know that the great civilizations of the ancient world all started on rivers, on major rivers. There was the constant water supply, but it was also good for communication. It was also good for travel and trade as well. Kind of another view that I like is just kind of seeing the urban growth, I guess, of the city-state in Mesopotamia right here. And you can see the ziggurat, you can see the large buildings as well. And then in the background, you can see a lot of the canals and the wheat fields that were growing during this time. One of the things that's going to happen in Mesopotamia over thousands of years is they're going to over-farm. They're going to cut down a lot of trees, deforestation of this area, and it's going to cause deserts. And there's going to be upheaval and famine and things of that nature because they're going to over-farm. It's going to take all the nutrients out of the earth, and that topsoil is going to be worthless. They're going to cut down the trees, the wind's going to blow, and it's going to slowly turn this very fertile area into desert. There are some very fertile areas still in Iraq, but they had been dwindling. Here's a close-up right here of the Tigris and the Euphrates. Again, you can see right here. If you look over to the right, the ancient name of Persia is there, called Elam. And that's found in Scripture quite a few times. In Genesis, it's mentioned as well. Mesopotamia is mentioned as well in Genesis, in these different, these different city-states. Most of the time, these city-states fought each other. They did not get along. There was constant upheaval. There was constant wars. But, on occasion, they did have treaties and they did trade with each other. Here's the map that I was talking about, and it shows the different trades that went on with the Mesopotamians in the land of Shinar. But you can see some of the places that they traded with and the things that they traded. So remember, during this time, it was not unusual for someone like Abraham to leave, to go to another place. It certainly took an amount of faith. It took a certain amount of resources, but we know that Abraham was a wealthy man. And so he went to a better place, and he followed a lot of the trade routes. And you can see the trade route is going to go north. If you're leaving from it's going to go north and follow the Euphrates River and then head down south to the land of Canaan, and that's where Abraham, as we know, is going to end up. This is where some of the first writing takes place, cuneiform, wedge-shaped, and there's some examples right there, and it just kind of looks like triangles and lines that were very hard to decipher, but they finally did figure it out. A cylinder roll, this was rolled on soft clay and then hardened and cooked, and this was kind of, they didn't use paper at this time, they just used clay, and they hardened it and they would roll this on it, And so this is an example right here of, a cylinder seal, and they would use these as far as communication, but also nobility and the kings would do this to kind of keep track of things. Cuneiform writing, we have different symbols that are going to mean certain things. And you can see at the bottom the cuneiform signs, just looks all gibberish to us, right? But this was the way that they communicated at first. And then here you go, deciphering cuneiform. I'm always amazed that someone could decipher this stuff. I would not know where to begin as far as deciphering cuneiform, right? But there's a lot of brilliant people up there that, slowly, figured out exactly what an A was, and so on and so forth. So there you go. And then, the scribes. Writing was a commodity. Most people that grew up in this area did not know how to write. Scribes were almost given this mythical power that they had the ability to take words and write them on a piece of paper, and then have someone take that piece of paper and say exactly what was said. That was like magic to people. And so scribes were used by the nobility and the kings to write things down. And we have thousands of these different tablets today from cities like Nineveh, Babylon, and other cities. There was a massive library, for instance, at Nineveh, that when it was burned, actually preserved thousands and thousands of these tablets. So we have all of this history from this period, which is great. And then, more cylinder rolls. This is actually a cylinder roll of the great Babylon king Marduk. And you can see him there with the wings and, showing his power and authority. And then the Babylonian Empire, right here, there are going to be two Babylonian empires. The first one is going to be under Hammurabi, and the small gray area, I shouldn't say small, but the gray area is the extent of his kingdom. Nebuchadnezzar, later on, about 1,200 years later, is going to extend that kingdom, and he's going to obviously come in contact with the Jews in Judah and destroy Jerusalem and take them captive for 70 years, as Scripture tells us. This is a pretty cool rendition of the ancient city of Babylon right here. You can see one of the channels of the Euphrates River running through it. And, we know the story of how the city was taken by the Persians, but the city, this water was diverted right there, and the Persians just kind of walked right in and took the city while Belshazzar was having a party. When he saw the handwriting on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Uphrasin. Another example right here of the city of Babylon. City of Babylon is going to be one of the great ancient cities of the world. And there's going to be this constant struggle in the Old Testament, as we know, particularly as the Jews go to Babylon and they're taken captive, to keep their traditions, to keep their religious beliefs. As the things of Babylon kind of kept creeping in, and there was always warnings in the Old Testament and in Isaiah, particularly in Jeremiah, about that, about being influenced in a negative way by the things of the world. And here is the famous Ishtar Gates, and these are massive, and this was one of the main gates into the city of Babylon. Hammurabi the judge, one of the great kings of the ancient world. You can see him here getting the law. And he would put up these steles, they were called, and on these stones he wrote Hammurabi's code, as we know, which is kind of the do's and don'ts of the ancient world. Babylonian math was very well known. They had geometry. Some of it is still written down today. Babylonian numbers. They had a base 60 numbering system, which went up to obviously 1 through 60, and we still use it today, right? When we tell time. We tell time the same way that the Babylonians tell time, 1 through 60. 60 seconds, 60 minutes. And we also keep track of the rotation of the earth, the year, very closely to the way the Babylonians did as well. And then, of course, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, built by Nebuchadnezzar. Although there is some research now that the The Hanging Gardens weren't built by Nebuchadnezzar. They were built by Sennacherib, who is also found in Scripture as well, in Nineveh. Okay, which brings us to Egypt. Now, Egypt is first mentioned in the 12th chapter of Genesis, and it involves Abram as well. And if we look at verse 9 of the 12th chapter of Genesis, and Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south. So he's moving down south from in the land of Canaan. And there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. You know, the land of Canaan, one of the negatives is it is prone to famine. There, you know, you do have the River Jordan, but it's very dry, and it has always been very dry. Now, if we look at this aerial shot of modern-day Egypt, we see that Egypt is very dry as well, except for the area along the Nile River. And, you know, we know that famous saying by Herodotus, the Greek historians, that Egypt was the gift of the Nile. And so we look at this picture right here and we can understand that, yeah, that makes sense. You know, you take away the Nile River, you wouldn't have all that green, you know, lush area right there. Now, in the north portion, in the delta, you have, which is lower Egypt, you have where the Israelites finally settled. As Egypt and the 70 souls, as Genesis tells us, went down into Egypt. Joseph was already down there. They're going to settle in the land of Goshen. Goshen was really prime real estate. It was prime farming and grazing area right there in the northern portion in the delta, where it fans out in this picture right here. And here you go in Goshen, in that area where the Nile is going to fan out into 7 different tributaries, or it was in the ancient world. And here's a picture of modern-day Goshen, and you can still see it's very lush. It's very green, perfect for the grazing of animals and for the growing of crops as well. Now, the early Hebrews are not going to be growing crops so much. There will be some of that, but they did make their livings from herding animals. They were shepherds, whether it was sheep, goats, cattle, that type of thing. Another example of the lushness of Egypt. In Egypt, the River Nile is going to flood its banks twice a year, and it's pretty regular. They knew when it was coming, and once it recedes, it leaves this very lush soil. All the nutrients in the soil is left behind. It makes for a great growing. And then daily life in Egypt. You have a couple scenes right here. The fishing. Egypt, for the most part, always had food, because it always could grow the crops, the barley and the wheat, always had the animals well fed because they were on the banks of the Nile. And the Nile always supplied, the growing season. And so while other countries of the world were struggling with famine, Egypt was always the place to go. And we know that, right, from in Genesis with the story of Joseph. You know, Joseph is going to become the governor of all Egypt, and Egypt is going to become the center of the food supply of that area. The Egyptian nobility, which Joseph would have been a part of, you can see kind of their hunting fowls and stuff like that. The priestly class, Joseph is going to marry one of the high priest's daughters, and he would have been acquainted with this kind of stuff. Now, the three gods of Egypt: Osiris, Isis, and Horus. Osiris and Isis are going to have a son. Their son's name is Horus, and so the Pharaoh is going to become the embodiment of Horus. He's going to be a god himself, or the Egyptians believe that. And so when we have the great confrontation in Exodus between Moses and Aaron and God against Pharaoh, it's really this great clash between Yahweh and all of the gods of the Egyptians embodied in Pharaoh. And you can understand why Pharaoh would react the way that he did when you think you're a god, when you think you're Horus. You know, you're not going to listen to some sheep herder telling you what to do. Here's an interesting picture right here. Do I have another one? No. This is their belief of the afterlife. And this is the judgment where they would be brought. You can see that the dead man in white, whenever you see an Egyptian in white, he's dead. They would put linen on them when they died. And so he is being brought to the judgment seat by Anubis, who's the god of mummification. And Anubis is going to weigh his heart in the balance. And if it is full of sin, it is going to be heavier than the feather of truth. And if his heart is full of sin, the destroyer there, who is going to be a crocodile, a lion, and a hippo, is going to devour the heart of the wicked man. Pretty interesting. And so this is some of the belief system, right? And you can understand the influence that this belief system is going to have on the Israelites when they're down there. And this is why God wants to pull them out, to set them up in a land of their own. Here's something interesting. If we can turn to Exodus very quickly. In the 5th chapter of Exodus. In verse 11, go ye, we know the story, right? They were told that, they couldn't, the straw wasn't going to be provided. The Hebrews weren't going to get straw anymore. Go ye, get straw where ye can find it, yet not aught of your work shall be diminished. So the people were scattered abroad throughout all the land of Egypt to gather stubble instead of straw. And the taskmaster hastened them, saying, fulfill your works, your daily tasks, as when there was straw. So here is a picture right here of ancient Egyptians. What are they making? They're making bricks, right? And so this is the process. They would be baked in the sun. The straw would be mixed together as well. And so these are actually reliefs that are found in Egypt, which kind of gives credence to exactly what Scripture is talking about when it talks about the time frame when the Hebrews were building the cities, the treasure cities. And here is kind of a cutaway of some of the ancient housing in Egypt and how they lived. And the Israelites would live in houses like this as well. And you can see the posts, right? Where they're going to end up putting the Passover blood on the top, on the lintel, and the two side posts as the angel of death pass over. Thought that was pretty neat. They would live in close proximity to their animals as well. They didn't go out and build a big Amish barn or something like that. The animals lived pretty much around the same area. The Gaza complex, the Great Pyramids. Okay, by the time Moses came down into Egypt, was born in Egypt, the pyramids had been around for almost 2,000 years. Think about that. It's pretty impressive. And this is something that was built just for tombs of the pharaohs. They served no other purpose but just to showcase the greatness of the pharaohs. Man's pride, I guess. Okay, so eventually the children of Israel are going to get into the land, as we know. They're going to divide up the land as promised, and this is a familiar map to us. We can see all the different tribes here. We can see Saul's kingdom in the red there, or the maroon in the middle. David and Solomon's kingdom, he's going to extend it. And then the territory under Solomon is going to be in green there. So he's up near the Euphrates River. So they're going to become a very powerful kingdom that is going to be between the two great civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia. And the trade that is going to go on there is going to be very important to the Israelites. There are two areas, if we look on the coastline of the Great Sea of the Mediterranean, one in the north called Phoenicia, and then one in the south is a small sliver of land there called Philistia. And so we're going to get the Phoenicians up north, and we're going to get the Philistines down south. And we'll look very quickly at these two people and their impact on Israel. So first of all, there is going to be this mass migration that the Bible doesn't speak of, but it's where that we get people settling in the land of Canaan. And it's right about the time that Israel is going to be migrating as well. And they're called the Sea Peoples. as in they use the sea. If you see the blue arrows, they're going to come down from the northern parts of Greece, and both through land and by ship. They are going to invade not only Egypt, but also the land of Canaan. And this is where we get the term the Philistines. The Philistines are going to be descendants of these sea peoples, and they're going to live right on the border, right on the coastline of the land of Canaan. Here we see, the sea peoples. They were kind of like the ancient world's Vikings, right? And so, they're bad news. They're coming. They would, they would take over land. They'd take whatever they want, and eventually they're going to settle down. Pretty mean group of individuals. Now, the Philistines are going to inhabit the coastline of the Mediterranean, and if we look at Samuel, we'll have to turn it up, but if we look at Samuel, we know that during the time, in Judges, we know that during the time of the Judges, Samson, along with other individuals, Samuel as well, are going to lead Israel, the Hebrews, against the Philistines. There is going to be continuous war between the Philistines and the Hebrews during this time. Eventually, David is going to subdue the Philistines to the point where they're never going to be a threat to Israel. Here's an example right here of some Philistines being taken captive by Ramses II, the great pharaoh. He would make raids up into the Philistine area to take prisoners. And here you go. You got some Philistines. You can tell by their headdresses that they are Philistines, and they're all bound together, being brought back to Egypt to be slaves, probably during a war. Dagon was their main god, the fish god, and you can see Dagon right there, half man, half god, kind of like an evil mermaid or something like that. remember this story right here when the ark is brought before Dagon as a trophy of war, and Dagon falls before it, right? And that's when the Philistines say, we got to get this thing out of here, right? It's causing too many problems. Samson and the Philistines, right? They put out Samson's eyes. He has the young boy bring him to find the two pillars that held up the temple. He said, let me die with the Philistines, right? Down goes the temple, right? And so they were there to make sport of Samson. And of course, the great story of David and Goliath, right? We all know that story. Now, let's turn quickly to the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians really are going to be a remarkable people. Let's look quickly here. I think I put too many slides in this thing, but we'll try to get through as much as we can. Let's look at Ezekiel, the 26th chapter. The 26th chapter, he's talking about Tyre, which was the capital city of Phoenicia. Remember, Tyre is the king Hiram is going to make an alliance with King Solomon to build the temple. So we have that lovely lesson of both Jew and Gentile working together to build the temple of God. But anyways, in verse 17 of the 26th chapter, and they shall take up a lamentation for thee, talking about the destruction of Tyre, and say to thee, how art thou destroyed that wast inhabited of seafaring men, the renowned city which was strong in the sea, she and her inhabitants, which caused their terror to be on all the haunt of it. If we go on to chapter 27, verse 27, thy riches and thy fears, thy merchandise, the mariners, the pilots, the caulkers, the occupiers of merchandise, and all the men of war that are in thee, and in all the company which is in the midst of thee, shall fall into the midst of the sea, and in the day of ruin. And verse 24 talks about the clothing that they would sell. So they were known for being merchants, for the ships that they would build. And they had colonies throughout the Mediterranean. Their most famous colony is going to be Carthage. And that's going to be on the northern shore of Africa in modern-day Tunisia. And they're going to have a big war with the Romans called the Punic Wars. Anyways, they would make purple dye out of these snails that they would find. They would grind up the snails, and they would kind of get this purple pus. And they would mix it with water, and then they would dip their clothes in. And so purple is going to be the color of royalty all the great kings of the world are going to wear purple as a sign of their royalty and their importance. And so the Phoenicians are going to trade and all kinds of stuff. In fact, Solomon and Hiram are going to make a fleet of ships that are going to trade, but there was a shipwreck. Some of them were shipwrecked as well, and they really didn't do a whole lot there. Phoenician alphabet. Our alphabet is based upon the Phoenicians. The Hebrew alphabet as well is based very closely to the Phoenicians as well as the Greek and the Roman. So that's really one of the most important contributions of the Phoenicians. And here's just a quick picture slide of where the Phoenicians went. There are some stories of the Phoenicians going all the way up to Great Britain to trade in tin, and they traded all over the place. And you can see where the stops and so on. Cedars of Lebanon right here. They were known for the cedars. You can see some of the deforestation that has gone on over the millennia, because people, they just cut down all the cedar trees and haven't planted anything. But it is, you can see, you can imagine just hills and hills and hills of cedar. And there are still cedars left in Lebanon, which was where ancient Phoenicia was. The Israelites are going to go into captivity. The Assyrians are going to come down, take the northern kingdoms captive, the 10 tribes. A couple hundred years later, Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians are going to come. They're going to take them captive to Babylon for 70 years, which brings us to the Persians. The Persians are going to be one of these people, in my opinion, kind of get a bad rap, okay? Because we look at the Persians and say, oh, they're the bad guys that fought the Greeks, at the Battle of Marathon, the Battle of Thermopylae, the last stand of the 300. And the fact is, the Persians were one of the greatest, most benevolent civilizations that the world had seen. First of all, it was massive, and you can see how massive it was. But the Persians would allow conquered peoples to go back to their land as long as they paid taxes. They could keep their customs, their religion. And we know from Scripture that's exactly what happened with the Jews. They were in Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar said, hey, we're getting these guys out of here. Cyrus came along, and he allowed the Jews to go back into the land as long as they, just recognize Cyrus as the king, pay taxes, that type of thing. He was one of the great rulers of the ancient world. The Jews actually called him the anointed of the Lord, because they were so thankful to Cyrus for what he did. And in fact, if you look at Isaiah, he is prophesied to be the individual that would allow them to come back into the land over 150 years before he was born. The Persian Royal Road right here, and this is where trade would take place, but also communication would go back and forth between this great empire. It was kind of, if you're familiar with the United States history, it was like the ancient form of the Pony Express. They would have different outposts like every 15 miles, and they would have either camels or horses at these little stops, these little inns, and they would ride as fast as they could for 15 miles, switch out another rider, so on and so forth. So you could get a message from Asia Minor all the way to Susa in 2 or 3 days, which is remarkable. Now, last person that we will look at very quickly, we just went through thousands and thousands of years of history in about 40 minutes. Alexander the Great. He is going to conquer Persia in the great wars between Persia and the Greeks. Here is Alexander's empire right here. It's going to stretch all the way from Macedonia in the west, all the way to the Indus River Valley in the east, which is modern-day Pakistan and modern-day India, a massive area. And what he's going to do is he's going to spread Greek ideas, Greek democracy, Greek culture, and Greek language through the world at this time. Okay? Alexander actually is mentioned in the prophet Daniel, if you want to look at that. Some of the prophecies having to do with Greece and Persia are mentioned in the prophecies of Daniel. But how does this affect the Old Testament? How does this affect Israel's history? How does this affect the gospel? Well, we know that all of the ancient texts that were written, the Old Testament itself, was translated into Greek. And we still have that. It's called the Septuagint. It was done down in Alexandria. 70 of the great scholars, Jewish scholars, got together and they translated the Old Testament into Greek, and we still have it today. The New Testament writing, the Gospels and the works of Christ, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, all of the epistles of Paul are going to be written in Greek. And so you can see how God works through men, through the kingdoms of men, to bring about his purpose. And so I guess that's really, we can end with this thought. We went through a lot of history. But throughout all of this history, God has chosen a certain group of people. And he has taken this group of people and he has manifested his work in his name through this group of people. Whether it was the Jews or whether it was the Gentiles, there were always individuals. And it's kind of like that saying, when we know the story of Elijah, when he thought he was alone. And he said, I'm the only one that cares about God. I'm the only one left. And God said, I have reserved unto myself 7,000 that have not bowed the knee to Baal nor kissed his image. And I think that's a great line of God telling, instructing Elijah what the deal was, right? God knows who are his. And throughout history, he has always had love and care, not only for the chosen, but for the whole world. And he wants to get this message of hope that he gave to us through his Son to the world. And it's important that we know it. It's important we understand the promises and the great love that God has had as he showed through his Son.